You lied to me, she whispered. Daniel's head lolled to the side, his heart pounding, fear creeping in as he realized he was losing control of his body. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick. Selma stood, walking slowly toward him. She ran a finger along his jawline, her expression unreadable. Then, in one swift motion, she pulled out a thin, sharp blade and pressed it against his throat. You told me you loved me, she murmured. You promised me honesty. Daniel tried to struggle, but he was too weak. The sedative she had laced his wine with had done its job. With one decisive movement, she slit his throat. The room filled with the scent of blood and wine. Daniel gurgled, his body convulsing before going still. Selma exhaled slowly, watching as the life drained from his eyes. She felt no remorse, only a quiet satisfaction. She wiped the blade clean, then calmly set to work. An hour later, Daniel Carter had disappeared. His car was found abandoned near a wooded area miles away, his body buried beneath the cold Alabama soil. To the world, Daniel Carter had simply vanished. His wife reported him missing, but with no signs of foul play, the case went cold. Selma continued her life as if nothing had happened. She returned to Ciel d'Alger, serving pastries and tea with a serene smile. But the taste of revenge was addictive, and it wouldn't be long before another man betrayed her trust. For weeks after Daniel Carter's disappearance, Selma Bensella carried on as if nothing had changed. She ran her cafe with the same quiet grace, greeting customers with a soft smile and serving pastries with delicate precision. No one suspected that behind those emerald green eyes lay the mind of a woman who had just committed murder. The thrill of watching Daniel take his last breath had awakened something inside her, an intoxicating sense of control. He had betrayed her, just like every other man before him, but this time she had not been the victim. She had rewritten the ending of the story, and she was about to do it again. Mark Holloway was different from Daniel. A 36-year-old corporate lawyer, Mark had a boyish charm that made him seem harmless. With his neatly combed blonde hair, expensive suits, and polished Southern manners, he was the kind of man who knew how to make a woman feel special. Selma met him at her cafe one evening, just as she was closing. He had stopped by for a quick coffee after a late meeting and struck up a conversation. Unlike Daniel, Mark didn't try to impress her with gifts or empty promises. He listened. He asked about Algeria, about her life in France, about what had brought her to Alabama. For the first time in years, Selma felt something close to trust. Over the next few weeks, their relationship blossomed. Mark was attentive, respectful, and unlike Daniel, single, at least that's what he claimed. Selma let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different, until one night when everything changed. Selma had never been the type of woman to snoop, but experience had taught her that men were rarely as honest as they seemed. One evening, while Mark was in the shower, she glanced at his phone. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through his messages. There they were, the words she had dreaded. A conversation with a woman named Emily. Emily, I can't wait to see you this weekend. Are you sure your work trip excuse will hold up? Mark, of course, babe. Selma doesn't suspect a thing. The blood drained from Selma's face. She had been a fool again, for a moment. She simply stared at the screen, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. The betrayal was like a knife to her chest. But this time, she didn't cry. She smiled. She had been through this before, and she knew exactly how to handle it. That evening, Selma was the perfect girlfriend. She kissed Mark deeply when he stepped out of the shower, whispering sweet nothings in his ear. She prepared his favorite meal, grilled lamb with couscous, pouring him a glass of red wine as they talked late into the night. Mark had no idea he was already a dead man. Selma waited a few days before making her move. She needed the perfect setting. Selma's plan unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. She played the long game, feeding Victor's ego just enough to keep him invested. She let him believe he was making progress, smiling at his flirtations, accepting his extravagant gifts, and responding just enough to keep him hooked. But behind her composed exterior, every interaction was calculated. Every lingering glance, every soft laugh, every seemingly innocent touch was a move in the game she was playing. Victor, ever the self-assured predator, saw her as another conquest. a challenge, a woman who could resist him for only so long before eventually surrendering. What he failed to realize was that Selma was not prey. She was the one setting the trap. And then, just as he was starting to grow impatient, she gave him what he wanted, a private dinner, just the two of them. She chose the perfect setting, a secluded rooftop restaurant with candlelit tables, a soft breeze carrying the scent of jasmine through the night air. The kind of place where lovers whispered secrets over fine wine, where a man like Victor would feel invincible. From the moment he arrived, she let him believe he had won. She leaned in when he spoke, let her fingers graze his wrist, laughed at his carefully rehearsed jokes. She let him think she was finally letting her guard down, finally allowing herself to be swept away by his charm. Victor basked in it, confident that the night would end the way he expected. Selma, meanwhile, had never been more certain of what had to come next. Tonight, Victor Harris would take his last breath. As the evening stretched on, Victor sat back in his chair, exuding the smug confidence of a man who believed he had won. He thought Selma was his, that she had finally surrendered to his charm. He didn't know that she had been waiting for this moment all along. She had planned every detail with precision. The poison, a rare, untraceable substance, dissolved seamlessly into his drink, disappearing with a single casual stir. It was slow acting, paralyzing his nervous system bit by bit, leaving him unaware of his own downfall until it was too late. Victor lifted his glass and took a sip, oblivious to the fate he had just sealed. At first it was subtle, his speech slurred, his breath grew shallow. He shook his head, trying to clear the sudden fog creeping into his mind. He must have had too much to drink. That's what he told himself. Then he saw the look in Selma's eyes. What's going on? His words came out thick, heavy. His fingers fumbled for his glass, but his limbs wouldn't cooperate. Selma leaned forward, her lips curling into a knowing smile. You never learn, do you, Victor? Her voice was soft, almost affectionate. His face twisted with confusion, then panic. He tried to move, but his body felt like lead. His heart raced, pounding against his ribcage, yet he was growing weaker with each passing second. You thought you could use me, Selma continued, her voice steady, emotionless. Just like the others, but you never understood who you were dealing with. His breath came in shallow gasps as the world around him blurred. He wanted to fight, to speak, to beg, but there was nothing he could do. By the time his body was discovered, the official report was simple. Natural causes. No foul play, no signs of struggle. Just another powerful man brought down by his own excess. No one suspected Selma. No one ever did. She had taken everything from him, his pride, his control, his illusion of invincibility. And in doing so, she had finally silenced another ghost from her past. But peace was fleeting. Then came James Miller. Charming, patient, different. He listened to her, made her feel seen. For the first time in years, Selma let herself believe in something beyond vengeance. Until she discovered the truth. The letters hidden in his desk, the whispers of another woman, the same tired lies. She should have expected it. That night, she invited James over for dinner, poured the wine, met his gaze with a soft, unreadable smile. You won't betray me again, she murmured, brushing her lips against his ear. He never saw it coming. The poison worked swiftly this time. No theatrics, no waiting, just the quiet, certain end of a man who had made one mistake too many, another betrayal, another casualty. Selma left him there, lifeless and cold, and stepped into the night. Free, unburdened. Or so she thought. News of James Miller's death spread fast. The police whispered about patterns, coincidences that no longer felt like accidents. And then, the name surfaced. Selma Ben-Sella. Detective Sarah Hayes had handled countless cases, murders, missing persons, domestic disputes. But this was different. There was something deliberate about these deaths, something personal. Selma had covered her tracks well, but no one was truly invisible. As Sarah dug deeper, an unexpected name emerged. Khalid Amir, Selma's first love, the one who had vanished years ago. Had he returned? Had he been watching her? Had he orchestrated these deaths, or had Selma been playing her own game all along? The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting. But one thing was clear. Selma was either a victim of something far bigger than anyone realized, or the mastermind of it all. When the police finally arrested her, the media pounced. They called her the Black Widow, a woman who had used love as a weapon, luring men to their deaths. In court, she was calm, composed. The prosecution painted her as a cold-blooded killer. The defense argued she was a woman driven to desperation by a lifetime of betrayal. Then Selma took the stand. She didn't deny it. She didn't beg for mercy. She simply looked at the jury and said, "I did what I had to do." The verdict came swiftly, guilty. Life in prison, no parole. And yet, as she was led away, Selma didn't look defeated. She looked like a woman who had always known exactly how the story would end. As the courtroom doors swung shut behind her, Selma Ben-Salah didn't look back. The murmur of voices, the gasps of onlookers, the gavel's final strike. None of it mattered anymore. She had played her final hand, and now she would pay the price. Yet as the guards led her away in chains, there was no regret in her eyes. No fear, just a quiet acceptance, as if this had been inevitable all along. Her name would echo through the town long after her departure. Some would call her a monster, a woman consumed by vengeance. Others would whisper that she was merely a product of the world that had shaped her, a victim first, an avenger second. The debate would rage on, but Selma herself had no more use for it. Her story was over, at least to the outside world. Prison was a strange kind of freedom. There were no more men to deceive, no more betrayals waiting in the shadows. The bars that confined her were more honest than the world she had left behind. She did not seek out conversation. She had no interest in redemption. The letters poured in, some from those fascinated by her crimes, others from men drawn to the dangerous allure of a woman who had outplayed them all. She ignored them. Selma had no need for admirers. She had no need for anything. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Hayes couldn't shake the case from her mind. Justice had been served, the headlines declared. But was it that simple? Selma had been both executioner and victim, her crimes a twisted reflection of the betrayal she had suffered. How many choices had truly been her own, and how many had been shaped by the cruelty of others? It was a question Sarah knew she would never fully answer. The families of the dead struggled to move on. James Miller's parents buried their son with little fanfare, drowning in the shame of knowing the truth. He had not been an innocent man. The others who had fallen to Selma's hand were remembered with bitterness, their legacies tainted by the lies they had lived. And Selma, she sat alone in her cell, staring at the cracked concrete wall, tracing invisible patterns only she could see. There was no remorse in her heart, but neither was there satisfaction. Revenge had been a game, and she had won. But even the victor had to live with the silence that followed. Her story was finished, or so she thought. Because in the quiet halls of the prison, an envelope arrived one morning, slipped beneath her door. No return address, no signature. Just a single line scrawled in the center of the page. "You didn't kill them all." Selma's fingers tightened around the paper, her pulse steady, unshaken. A slow smile curled across her lips. Maybe her story wasn't over just yet. The story of Selma Ben-Salah is one that lingers in the shadows of morality, justice, and revenge. Some saw her as a woman pushed beyond her limits, a victim who turned predator. Others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer, no different from the men she destroyed. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between, an unsettling gray area where justice and vengeance blur. Her case became more than just a crime story. It was a reflection of the choices people make when faced with betrayal, manipulation, and pain. It forced a town to confront uncomfortable truths about the men they once respected, about the quiet suffering of women like Selma, and about the consequences of a world where deception thrives. Selma's name would be whispered in hushed conversations for years, her legacy shifting depending on who told it. To some, she was a monster. To others, she was a woman who refused to be a victim. But no matter the perspective, one fact remained. Selma Ben-Salah lived and died on her own terms. And in the end, perhaps that was the only justice she ever truly cared about.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more